Everything you did was just your responsibility. That was the first sentence my son said to me in 10 years. Not hello, not how are you, not even we need to talk. Just that. He stood across the kitchen table like a stranger who knew my name, his hands resting calmly on a manila envelope. No shaking, no anger. He looked prepared. Like this was a meeting he'd rehearsed in his head 100 times, and I was just another step on a checklist. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Say that again, I asked. He didn't raise his voice, didn't soften it either. Everything you did for me growing up, he said, tapping the envelope once with his finger. That was just your responsibility. That doesn't make you my father. If you've ever felt the air leave a room without a sound, you'll know what that moment felt like. The stove was still warm. I'd been making eggs the way my youngest grandson likes them, soft, not runny, with just enough salt. The house smelled like butter and coffee, like every morning for the last 11 years. In the next room, 3 kids I'd raised from diapers to school backpacks were still asleep, completely unaware that something irreversible had just been said at the table. My son slid the envelope toward me. "Read it," he said, "before you say anything." The paper made a quiet sound as it crossed the wood. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. I didn't open it right away. I looked at him instead. He used to sit at the same table doing homework, elbows everywhere, asking for help he didn't really want. I'd stayed up nights fixing his science projects, gone to work exhausted, told myself it was worth it because that's what fathers do. Somewhere along the line, I must have believed those years meant something. Apparently, I was wrong. This isn't about feelings, he added, almost kindly. It's about facts. Facts. That word landed harder than the sentence before it. I picked up the envelope. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Legal language, clean margins, my name typed neatly at the top. The first line read, "Dad, I'm not your son." I felt my chest tighten, but before I could react, I saw there was more. A second page, shorter, colder. "And everything you did for me was just your responsibility." That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not in a way anyone else could hear, but deep enough that I knew it would never fit back the same way again. I looked up at him. "And the kids?" I asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. "They're my responsibility now." There it was, the real reason he was here. He wasn't back for family. He wasn't back for reconciliation. He was back to erase me. If this were a revenge story, this would be the part where I slammed my fist on the table, raised my voice, demanded answers. But real life doesn't work like that. Real pain doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, heavy and patient, waiting for you to realize how much you've already lost. I folded the paper once, then again. "Did you come all this way?" I asked. "Just to tell me I never mattered?" He finally looked uncomfortable. "I came to make things official." From the other room, I heard a small voice call out, "Grandpa?" I didn't answer right away. Somewhere between that word and the envelope in my hands, I understood one thing clearly. This wasn't just about blood. This was about gratitude. And I was about to learn how little of it survives when money and pride enter the room. I used to believe gratitude was something you learned by watching it, not by being told. Maybe that's an old-fashioned thought. Maybe it only makes sense if you grew up in a time when people stayed, even when it was hard. But for most of my life, that belief was the one thing I never questioned. I raised my son the same way my father raised me, by example. You showed up, you worked, you didn't keep score. You didn't talk about sacrifice like it was a badge. You just did what needed to be done, and trusted that, one day, it would mean something. When he was 7, his shoes wore out before the school year ended. I patched the soles with duct tape and told him they were custom. He laughed like it was a joke between us. When he was 13, I took a night shift so I could be home in the afternoons. When he was 18, I co-signed a loan I knew I'd be paying off long after he forgot it existed. I never reminded him of any of that, not once, because that's what a father does. Or at least, that's what I thought. After he left, really left, not just moved out but disappeared, he dropped 3 kids into my life like an afterthought. No plan, no apology. Just a promise that he'd get back on his feet. I didn't argue. I didn't ask how long. I just made space. Bought bunk beds. Learned how to stretch meals. Learned how to keep fear quiet at night so the kids wouldn't hear it. Years went by like that. 11 of them. Some nights, when the house finally went quiet, I'd sit at the kitchen table and wonder if he even remembered who paid for his first car. Or who sat in the ER all night when he broke his arm. Not because I wanted credit, but because I believed memory was how gratitude survived. Let me ask you something. Have you ever done everything right, only to realize later no one was keeping track but you? I never said that out loud. I didn't need to. The kids called me Grandpa. That was enough. It felt like proof that staying mattered more than blood. That being there was its own kind of reward. That's why, when he walked back into my kitchen with that envelope, I didn't expect what came next. I expected anger, or regret, or even silence. What I didn't expect was to hear my entire life reduced to a responsibility. Because when you believe gratitude matters, you build your life on that belief. You forgive things you shouldn't. You endure things you could walk away from. You tell yourself that love has weight, that it leaves a mark. And if you're watching this and thinking, I've lived that exact way, then you already know where this is going. This isn't just my story. It's a revenge story only in the quietest sense, where nothing explodes and no one yells, but something precious still gets taken. By the time I reached for that envelope in the next room, I still believed one thing, even after everything he'd done. I believed gratitude had to mean something. I just didn't know yet how wrong I was. I didn't open the envelope right away. I stood there in the hallway, holding it like it might bite me if I moved too fast. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind that tells you, before you read a single word, that someone put thought into how they wanted to be taken seriously. My son watched me from the kitchen table. He didn't look angry. That was the strange part. He looked calm, organized, like this wasn't emotional for him at all, like it was something he'd rehearsed. "You should read it," he said. His voice was steady, polite even. "It explains everything." That sentence alone should have warned me. Because when someone says it explains everything, what they usually mean is I've already decided how this ends. I finally sat down. My knees creaked louder than the chair. I unfolded the paper slowly, buying myself time I didn't really need. Part of me already knew whatever was written there wasn't meant to thank me. It wasn't meant to remember late nights, or empty bank accounts, or birthdays I skipped so his kids wouldn't have to. It was meant to erase. The first line hit me harder than I expected. "Dad, after a lot of thought, I've realized the past needs to stay where it belongs." I stopped reading. If you've ever been on the receiving end of that sentence, you know what it means. It's the polite version of, "Your sacrifices are inconvenient now." It's the clean, professional way of saying, "What you gave me doesn't fit the life I'm trying to build." I kept going. There were phrases about boundaries, about moving forward, about how the kids needed stability, and how he was finally in a position to provide it. No mention of who had been doing that job for the last decade. No mention of who stayed when he disappeared. Just one clean conclusion. From this point on, it's best if you step back. Step back. Like I was some volunteer who'd overstayed his shift. I looked up at him then. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at his phone, scrolling like this was a business meeting running a little long. "You couldn't just say this to me?" I asked. He shrugged. Not cruel, worse, indifferent. This was easier. That's when something inside me shifted. Not rage, not yet. Just a heavy, sinking clarity. Some of you listening right now know that moment. The exact second you realize the person you protected doesn't see you as a person anymore. Just a phase they grew out of. If you're nodding without meaning to, you're not alone. I folded the letter back up carefully. I didn't tear it. I didn't throw it. I placed it on the table between us, like evidence. "All those years," I said quietly. "You don't even mention them." He finally looked at me then. There was a flicker of discomfort. Just a flicker. "That was your choice," he said. "I didn't ask you to." That was the moment. Not the envelope, not the words. That sentence. Because when someone denies your sacrifice, they don't just reject your help. They rewrite your life. They turn love into a hobby, loyalty into a mistake. I nodded slowly, like I understood. Maybe I even smiled. "All right," I said, "if that's how you see it." He relaxed after that, thought he'd won. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know yet, was that gratitude doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to acknowledge it. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it comes back heavier than an envelope ever could. The change didn't happen all at once. It came quietly, the way things always do when someone decides you're in the way. The first sign was a phone call from the school. Not angry, not accusing, just careful. The kind of careful people use when they don't want to offend the wrong person. "We just wanted to confirm," the woman said. "Who's authorized to make decisions for the children moving forward?" Moving forward. That phrase again. I told her the truth, that I always had, that nothing had changed. There was a pause on the line, the faint clicking of keys. "Oh," she said. "We were told otherwise." I hung up the phone and sat there for a long time, staring at the wall like it had answers. The house felt different after that. Not empty, threatened. Like the ground under my feet had quietly shifted, and I was the only one who noticed. By the end of the week, the changes had a rhythm. A letter from a lawyer, polite, clinical, addressed to Mr. Bennett, not Dad, not Grandpa. It informed me that my son was reviewing custodial arrangements and suggested I prepare for a transition period. A transition. Like I was a temporary shelter. If you've ever been replaced without being fired, pushed aside without a goodbye, you know how humiliating that language feels. It pretends to be respectful while slowly erasing you. Then came the visits. My son started stopping by unannounced, always dressed sharp, always smiling just a little too much. He'd look around the house like he was inspecting a rental property. open the fridge, check the thermostat, ask questions that sounded like concern, but landed like criticism. Don't you think the kids need more space? Have you thought about how this looks to outsiders? I just want what's best for them. What he never asked was how I was holding up. One afternoon, while the kids were doing homework at the table, he leaned against the counter and said it casually, like it was a suggestion he'd read online. "You know," he said, "people are starting to ask questions." I didn't look up. About what? About why you're still in charge. That word again. Still. Like time had expired and no one bothered to tell me. The kids went quiet. They weren't stupid. They could hear the tone. Emma's pencil stopped moving. Noah stared at his hands. Lucas looked at me, waiting, watching my face the way kids do when they're trying to figure out if the ground is about to disappear. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't about love, and it wasn't about concern. It was about control. My son didn't want to thank me. He didn't even want to argue with me. He wanted to replace me, cleanly, legally, without ever having to acknowledge what I'd done. Some of you listening know this part too. When the person who benefited from your sacrifice starts treating your presence like a liability. When staying becomes suspicious instead of admirable. That night, after everyone went to bed, I found myself opening drawers I hadn't touched in years. Old folders, receipts, papers I'd kept because something in me always believed memory mattered. I didn't know what I was looking for yet. I only knew this much. If he was building a case to erase me, I needed to understand how. Because gratitude may not be guaranteed, but truth has a way of waiting. And I could feel it, sitting quietly in the dark, waiting for its turn. I didn't realize how far things had gone until the knock came from the front door. 2 people stood there, one man in a gray blazer, holding a leather folder. One woman with a clipboard and a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Bennett?" "Yes." "We're here to conduct a welfare review." That was the phrase they used. Welfare review. Not investigation, not accusation. Something softer, safer. Something that sounded like it was for the kids, until you felt the weight of it pressing on your chest. They stepped inside and started looking around without asking. Notes were taken. Photos were glanced at. The woman bent slightly to speak to Noah, like she was trying to be friendly, but her eyes kept drifting back to me. "How long have the children been living here? Who handles their finances? Do you receive any assistance?" Every question landed the same way. Not curious, evaluating. I answered calmly. I'd learned that tone mattered more than truth in rooms like this. But inside, something was cracking. Because I knew who had sent them. My son didn't want a conversation anymore. He wanted a record. Later that day, I found the envelope taped to the door. Certified mail. Legal language. Cold. Efficient. It informed me that a petition had been filed questioning my fitness to remain the children's primary caregiver. Fitness. Like love had an expiration date. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone was asleep. The house creaked the way old houses do, like it was breathing with me. I laid out the papers, one by one. Medical bills I paid, school forms I signed, loan statements with my name at the bottom. Proof of a life quietly spent holding things together. And suddenly I understood the real cruelty of it all. He wasn't denying what I'd done. He was reframing it, turning sacrifice into overreach, turning loyalty into control. turning a father who stayed into a problem that needed solving. Some of you watching know this exact moment. The one where you realize the person you raised is using the system against you. Not because you failed them, but because you succeeded too well. The next morning, the kids were quieter than usual. Lucas finally asked what they were all thinking. Are they trying to take us away? I wanted to lie. I wanted to protect them from adult ugliness, but I looked at their faces. Faces I'd seen in sickness and joy and fear, and I knew the truth mattered more than comfort. They're trying to change things, I said carefully, but nothing's decided. Emma nodded slowly, too mature for her age. Because Dad doesn't want to say thank you, she said. I didn't respond. I couldn't. That afternoon, I made a decision. I stopped reacting. I started preparing. Every document went into a folder. Every receipt, every photo. I wasn't building a defense. I was preserving a truth that someone else wanted erased. Because this was no longer just a family argument. It was a quiet war over who gets to define a life. And before we go any further, let me ask you something, especially if you're still watching at this point. Have you ever been there for someone so long that when they finally stood up, the first thing they did was push you aside? If that question hit a nerve, stay with me, because what came next was the moment everything turned. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, early, quiet. The kind of time slot meant for paperwork, not drama. That alone should have told me something. This wasn't supposed to be a fight. It was supposed to be a formality, a clean transfer, a signature at the bottom of a page where my name slowly faded out. My son arrived confident, suit pressed, hair perfect, a hand on his lawyer's shoulder like they were partners, not client and hired gun. He nodded at me once, politely, the way you nod at someone who used to matter. The kid sat behind me, close, too close. I could feel Lucas's knee bouncing against the back of my chair. Emma sat straight, jaw tight. Noah kept twisting the sleeve of his hoodie in his fingers, over and over, the way he did when he was scared. That was when I understood something very clearly. Whatever happened in this room wasn't just about custody. It was about history. The judge started reading through the filings. Words like concern, capacity, long-term viability. My son's lawyer spoke smoothly about best interests and appropriate transitions. It all sounded reasonable, harmless even. Then the judge looked at me. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "do you have anything to submit before we proceed?" My son didn't turn around. He didn't need to. In his mind, this part was already over. I stood up slowly. "My son says this arrangement happened because I wanted it," I said. My voice didn't shake. That I chose this. That I overstepped. I reached into the folder I'd brought. Not thick, not dramatic. Just one document. "I'd like to submit this." The clerk took it. The judge read it once. Then again. The room changed. If you've ever watched someone realize they misjudged the situation completely, you know the look. It's not anger. It's that frozen second where their confidence has nowhere to go. The document was dated years ago, signed, notarized, written in my son's handwriting. A consent letter. It stated plainly that he had voluntarily left the children in my care, that he would not return for them, that he understood I would make all decisions until further notice. No conditions, no timelines, no gratitude. Just abandonment, put into ink. My son stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That's not," he started. The judge held up a hand. "Sit down." And that's when it happened. Noah tugged on my sleeve. "Grandpa?" he whispered. Not loud, just enough. I leaned down. He pointed, innocently, without understanding the weight of it, straight at my son. "He signed that," Noah said. "I remember. He said his hand hurt and you gave him ice." The room went still. Not because of the paperwork, because of the child. My son didn't look at Noah. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes glassy. For the first time since this started, he looked small. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Bennett," he said to my son, "this changes the nature of these proceedings." My son's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently. My son didn't respond. He just sat there, finally realizing something he'd avoided his entire life. You can deny gratitude. You can rewrite stories, but you can't erase the truth when it's been living in the same house all along. The hearing was adjourned, not decided, but shifted. The ground moved back under my feet. As we stood to leave, my son finally looked at me. Really looked. "I didn't think you'd use that," he said quietly. I nodded. I didn't think I'd need to. And before this chapter ends, I want to ask you, because if you're still here, this story probably isn't just entertainment for you. Have you ever been taken for granted so completely that the only thing that saved you was proof you never thought you'd have to show? If that question feels personal, then you already understand what this moment cost me, and why the final reckoning was still coming. The court didn't clap. No one stood up and cheered. There was no apology waiting in the hallway. The judge postponed the final decision. More reviews, more evaluations, more time. That was the price of truth. It moved slower than lies. My son left the room without saying a word. He didn't look back. I watched him walk down the corridor, shoulders tight, phone already in his hand. Maybe calling his lawyer. Maybe rewriting the story again in his head. I realized then that winning in a courtroom doesn't mean you win a relationship. The kids stayed close to me. Lucas didn't say anything. He just walked on my left. Emma held Noah's hand on my right. That was it. No speeches, no promises. That night, back in the house, I sat at the same kitchen table where this all began. The same chair, the same quiet. Nothing felt resolved. And maybe that's the truth people don't like to hear. Sometimes you don't get gratitude. Sometimes the people you saved never thank you. Sometimes all you get is the right to stay standing. If you're listening to this and hoping for a perfect ending, I don't have one. What I have is this. I stayed. I didn't disappear. And even if my son never admits what I gave him, the kids know who raised them. For some of us, that has to be enough.